Ever stood under a sky so wide, your secrets felt small here on the heart of a cowboy? We ride the stories of the West campfire truths trail dust memories saloon whispers. Gritty humans, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The noon wind came dry and red, shouldering past the slats of the window and scattering grit across the table. 3 wooden spoons lay beside a dented pot of broth that barely covered its own shadow. Tess Marlowe stirred anyway. The spoon knocked the side with a soft, hollow note. Noah watched from the floor, elbows on his knees. Maya pressed her face to the glass, tracing the outline of the cottonwood in the yard. The swing still hung there. 2 knots, one crooked. Wren chased a moth that kept losing itself in the light and then finding the dust. The letter from Sage County sat where the sun could reach it. The seal had bled in a sweat stain. Tess kept picking it up and smoothing it against her thigh as if the paper might remember how to be kind. She read the same 3 lines again. She did not move her lips. "Is it soup?" Noah asked. "It is what we have," she said. He nodded like a man, then looked smaller for doing it. Outside, something found a rattle in the fence and shook it. A rumble followed, deep and certain. Wren stopped chasing the moth. The moth found the ceiling. The rumble became a carriage. The carriage became black under the sun. 2 horses, dark as ash after rain, threw their breath like steam. A man climbed down, long coat, tall. He carried a cane with a silver head that caught the light. He looked at the house in a way that made the house seem to shrink inside its own outlines. 3 knocks, hard and neat. Tess wiped her hands on her skirt. Her palms left 2 pale handprints in the dust. She opened the door and the heat pushed in past him. He did not step back. "Mrs. Marlowe," he said. "Mr. Ward," she said. Gideon Ward's hat brim cast a clean line across his eyes. Gray eyes. It made them look colder than they were. Or maybe not. He took a folded packet from the inside of his coat and held it as if he were offering a napkin. "You received the notice," he said. "I received it," she said. "Then you understand." "I understand that you have land from here to the far ridge," Tess said, "and we have this one roof. That is the difference." He looked past her at the table, the pot, the 3 spoons. His gaze did not linger, and yet nothing escaped it. "This area is part of the Ward irrigation plan," he said. "The canal will cut through this parcel. It is lawful and recorded with the county." "Lawful does not mean gentle," Tess said. He lifted his chin a fraction. The cane clicked once on the threshold. "My work is not about gentleness," he said. "It is about keeping 500 people employed. It is about schedules and timber and water rights. It is not about 3 spoons." Wren slid into the doorway from behind Tess. She wore a dress that had lost the color it once wanted to keep. Her knees were brown with dust and summer. She looked up at Gideon Ward like he was a mountain that had decided to stand in a doorway. "Sir," she said. The word came out too soft. She cleared her throat. "Sir, please do not take our house." She went down on both knees in the yard. The ground printed itself into her skin. She put her hands together because that seemed like what you did when you had nothing but hands. "Please." Noah stood behind his sister and did not cry. Maya's fingers dug into the wood of the frame. Tess did not reach for Wren. If she touched the girl, she would not stop. Gideon Ward's hand tightened on the cane. His other hand found his pocket watch without looking. He pressed the lid open. The tick rose out of it and hung between them like a small, nervous bird. He saw a hallway that was not here. He saw a woman in a blue dress with sleeves too tight for her joy. Evelyn had laughed at the doctor, and then the laugh faded, and then the room did not remember how to be a room. He had carried a box no bigger than 2 hands. He had set it down under a cottonwood that did not grow on this land. He had wound every clock he owned and listened to them argue across the hours. The wind came through again. It lifted the hair at Tess's temple and brought the smell of horse and hot iron and sage. Gideon's eyes came back to the present like a man surfacing. He closed the watch. The small bird vanished. "You will not be removed today," he said. Tess breathed for the first time since the carriage stopped. "You will have 1 week," he said. "Use it." The words dropped into the room and found every corner. "Yes, sir," Tess said. She kept her voice level. Her hands shook anyway. He stepped back from the door. The horses shifted and threw shadows against the house. Wren stayed where she was until he looked at her. Then she stood brushing grit off her knees with quick, angry swipes, as if anger could dust anything clean. Gideon turned and climbed into the carriage. The driver snapped the reins. The wheels chewed the road and left a red ribbon behind them. Inside, Tess sat on the floor. She pulled Wren into her lap. Maya came without being called. Noah folded himself down on the other side of her and leaned into her shoulder. She did not tell them it would be all right. She did not say anything. She listened to the pot on the stove make a sound that tried to be a boil. When the sun dropped, the house turned the color of old photographs. Tess lit a lamp and set it on the table. The flame licked the glass and steadied. She took the letter and put it in a drawer. She took it out. She put it back. She chose the drawer. On the hill, Ward House kept its own light. The stone took the evening and refused to give it back. Gideon walked through the front doors that his father had insisted on shipping up from New Orleans by rail and mule, and men who were paid by the mile. The foyer smelled of wax and cedar. The rug carried dust that no one's shoes had made. He could have crossed the ground floor with his eyes closed and not touched a chair. He could have eaten at the table without moving his knife from the right side to the left. He had not missed a meal. He had not finished one. He passed the library. The brass pendulum in the tall case clock swung with a cold precision. He passed the parlor. The marble mantel gave his face back to him in pieces. The dining room waited. The table ran too far for the lamps. The chairs stood in lines like men who had never seen battle. He took the head of the table. He did not sit. He did not touch the back of the chair that should have been pulled out by another hand. He went to the study. The portrait hung where the light did not reach. Evelyn looking to one side, one hand on her belly. The painter had put light in her eyes that the room could not supply. Dust had settled along the top edge of the frame. Gideon lifted his thumb and drew a single line through it. He meant to wipe the whole thing clean. He did not. He opened the window. The night poured in. The smell of creosote rose from the road where the day's heat let go of it. Somewhere past the stable, a mule called to nothing in particular. Gideon took the key from the mantel and wound the clocks. One in the study, one in the hall, one that sat on the edge of the bookcase like a stubborn cat. He listened as each tick found another tick. The sounds were out of step, and then they were not. The house learned the beat again. He set the key down. The silence that followed felt like a held breath, not an empty one. In the glass of the study door, he caught his own reflection with the portrait behind it. Two faces that had no business sharing the same plane. He turned out the lamp. For a moment the room kept his shape as if it wished to keep a man that did not intend to be kept. In the dark, somewhere deeper than the study, a clock missed a beat and then found it. Gideon stood still and listened to the house count time that did not belong to anyone. He waited until the next tick came. He did not move. He kept listening. The wind lifted the curtains and set them back. The key on the mantel gave a small metal sigh. The night held. Morning sifted into the house like ground flour. The broth from yesterday had become a skin in the pot. Tess broke it with the spoon and watched it knit again. The letter lay on the table, face down. It found its way back every time she put it in a drawer. Noah took the bushel basket to the yard and brought in 2 eggs that felt warm through the shell. Maya sorted rags by color. Wren lifted a chair and moved it an inch, because moving something felt like proof that the day had started. At Ward House, the light struck stone and turned thin. Gideon ate a crust and forgot the coffee beside it. He walked the length of the veranda without hearing his own steps and crossed to the stables to talk with Owen Pike. The foreman had a face tanned like a saddle and eyes that read weather. "Rats in the feed again," Owen said. "Lay strychnine," Gideon said. "Keep it away from the poultry. Lock the storeroom." Owen nodded and went for the tin and the small scoop. When he cracked the lid, the smell lifted into the morning air. Bitter dry, a note like penny on the tongue. Gideon knew it. He had learned the taste of it the same winter he learned silence. He stood in the stable doorway and looked toward the hill that hid Red Hollow. He put away the thought. He tried to put away the memory. He could not put away the smell. The week walked by in slow boots. Tess traded a bundle of mended shirts to Mrs. Dwyer for flour. She washed for the Kellys and left the laundry on a fence rail as promised. She measured oil with care and learned the sound the pot made when it was almost empty. At night, she set the children on the bed and combed hair from the ends because that tugged less. When the house went quiet, the clock inside her head would not stop counting. She counted with it. On the 5th day, a black carriage rolled up the road and took its place against the bright. The horses shook their manes and beat dust from the air. Gideon stepped down, and for a second the street cut him in two. Sun on one side, shadow on the other. He stopped at the fence. He did not raise the cane. Wren stood with her hand on the swing rope and watched him come through the gate as if he had never used one in his life. "Tess," he said. "Mr. Ward," she said. She did not invite him in. The door sat open anyway. The heat had already invited itself. He looked at the yard, the trough, the cottonwood, the small grave that had been marked by a flat stone and a ring of pebbles. He looked at the house and then at her face. I can stop the removal, he said. I can pay what you owe to the store and the doctor. I can put the children in school. I can do all of that without delay. Noah stiffened. Maya did not move. Ren took a step closer that left a small print of her heel in the dirt. There is a price, Tess said. Yes, Gideon said. He could have said more. He did not. I want you to run Ward House. The kitchen, the staff, the stores, everything. You will be my wife-in-law. I do not ask anything more of you. You will have your own room. The children will have rooms beside yours. The paper will make this arrangement clean. Her face did not change. Her throat did. She felt the swallow and hated that he could see it. Why me, she said. He looked past her for a moment and then back without moving his head. Because your children made a sound my house has not heard in a very long time, he said. Because a house cannot make its own sound. Noah cut in before he could think not to. We will have to leave here, he said. His voice dropped as if the yard could hear him. Either way. Tess put a hand on his shoulder and felt the bone and the heat under his skin. She thought of Caleb lying on a summer night when the cottonwood leaves clapped at the sky. She thought of his hand on her wrist and the weight of his head on the pillow when he turned to cough. She thought of the price of winter. When she said, 3 days, Gideon said, the courthouse will do it quiet. Her hand fell from Noah's shoulder. The air waited. A cart turned on the road down toward town and the wheel squealed where the rim had split. Yes, Tess said. The word surprised her mouth. It did not surprise her bones. I will do it for the children. He nodded once. A muscle in his jaw tightened and went still again. He opened his watch and closed it without looking at the hour. The courthouse did the work without ceremony. 2 clerks stood as witnesses and wrote their names in neat, pale blue ink. Tess stood in her best blue dress that had been her mother's dress before it had been folded into a chest for years. Gideon wore a black coat that did not know what daylight was. He took her hand when the judge said he could, and let it go when the judge did not say he should. Noah carried Ren on his hip down the front steps and set her on the flagstone when his arms shook. Maya held the basket with the 3 spoons and the small sewing kit tied with string. The move to Ward House was more quiet than any move had a right to be. The house received them without wait. The foyer took the children in and gave them back to the hall. The floor was cooler than their feet expected. The rugs 8 steps whole. The staff watched with the faces of people who were trained to have no faces. A maid with a stray curl at the nape bowed her head. Ephraim Finch, the assistant, stood with a ledger tucked under one arm and a pencil behind his ear, and saw everything. Gideon walked Tess through the first floor. Your room is in the west wing, he said. The children are there with you. I am in the east wing. Meals are at 6 and at noon and at sundown. You will set them as you like. The pantry keys are kept by the house manager. That is your title now. She nodded. The word felt large and then fit when she rolled it in her mouth without speaking it. That first week, Tess learned the kitchen by time and by heat. She watched which pan burned onions and which pan did not. She set a chalkboard in the pantry and wrote lists that turned to smudges and then became lists again. She asked the staff names and used them. She fixed a loose chair leg herself and left her hammer in the drawer of the sideboard where anyone could take it and put it back. When something spilled, she knelt with a cloth. When something broke, she swept and then picked up the last curl with her fingers because brooms lie. The staff stopped watching her. They watched the work. Gideon left early for the yards and the far fields. He returned when the light was more orange than white. He passed through rooms that were no longer simply rooms. They had begun to hold a small warmth that did not rise from the hearth. One afternoon in the library, Tess reached above the shelf for a bundle of yellowed receipts and touched a frame hidden against the wall. She pulled it free and dust patterned the air like old snow. The portrait showed a young woman in a blue dress face turned to fraction as if she had just heard something pleasant and would answer in a moment. One hand rested on her belly. The painter had given the eyes a light that the room did not yet know how to throw. Tess cleared a space and set the portrait where the afternoon made a square on the wood. She did not tell anyone she had moved it. At supper, Gideon paused in the doorway and found her looking not at him but at Evelyn. He stepped into the room, and the floor answered. Thank you, he said, for what Tess said. For putting her where she can see, he said. That night a storm rolled up neat and hard from the mesas. The first drop hit like a pebble thrown at a window, and then the rain found its own voice on the roof. The wind took a breath and pushed through the seams and set the curtains to a slow sway. Lightning wrote its quick script across the yard and then let the dark hold again. Noah turned on his side and slept through it because he was learning to. Maya put her hands over her ears and then took them away because she wanted to hear each sound exactly. Ren woke into the loud, and could not find which door was hers in the long hall, with the carpet that caught soft feet. She stepped into the first room with a light under the door. Gideon had not slept and did not plan to. He saw the handle turn and saw the small shape in the doorway and did not move fast in case fast would scare her. Mr. G. Wren said. The storm shook the window and she flinched. I think the sky is falling apart. He crouched and held out his hands. She came across the carpet like a boat that had decided to trust one shore. He lifted her and felt the weight and the warmth and the small hand find his collar. He sat on the edge of his bed and let the thunder talk. He counted between flash and sound and let his voice count with it until both counts matched. Tess followed the spill of light down the hall and stopped in the doorway. Her hair was loose and darker for being wet at the ends. She took in the bed and the window and the child asleep now against a chest that had learned to rise and fall for someone other than its owner. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice was careful to be small so it would not wake anything. She lost the way. She did not lose it, Gideon said. She found it. He did not look away from Wren's face. Tess stepped into the room enough to take the child, but did not lift her yet. The next flash turned the room white and showed every line and the space between lines. The next thunder pulled the air tight and then left it loose again. Tess reached and Gideon gave Wren into her arms without effort and without reluctance. The skirt brushed his knee, her hand brushed his knuckles. He stood. She stood. The rain worked at the window and at the roof. They did not speak again. She carried the child out, and at the door she looked back once not to say a word. He stood with the light behind him and did not move until the hallway had its silence returned. The clocks kept time on the far side of the house. The storm kept its own. In the morning the yard smelled of wet sage and something like iron rinsed clean. The day after the storm the ground held the shape of water. Puddles lay in the low places and the cottonwood put off a new clean smell. Noah found the saddle blanket damp to the touch and wrung it at the fence. Gideon lifted the saddle one-handed and set it gentle on the rail. The horse rolled an eye and snapped at the air, then settled with a snort. Left foot, Gideon said. Noah set his boot and pushed. He swung up too hard and landed with more bounce than balance. The gelding took a slow step and Noah tipped. Gideon's hand closed on his belt and set him right. The boy looked down, teeth clenched, then made himself laugh at his own near fall. That was the trick of riding and of many other things. Again, Gideon said. They circled the yard until Noah's legs learned the motion that hands could not teach. By the time Tess called them in for noon, the boy sat straighter. He slid down cheeks pink under the dust and tried to hide the grin that would not be hidden. Gideon pretended not to see it and saw it anyway. Inside, Maya had set paper on the end of the table and a glass bottle for water. She was making the house in lines too clean to be the house they stood in. She narrowed her eyes at the eaves and put a second line where the first had lied to her. Tess moved around her without disturbing the stillness the girl needed. Paint would do her good, Ephraim said later in the hall with his ledger open. He spoke like a man who has watched much and wants to speak less. Get what she needs, Gideon said. By the next week, a small room off the north gallery had light that fell just so. A rough easel stood like a person learning to stand. Pans of color sat in a row like new coins. Maya touched each with the tip of the brush, then watched blue turn to sky, and brown turn to bark, and green argue with itself until it chose leaf. Wren trailed them from room to room, as if they were all attached by a length of invisible string. She learned where the floor creaked and where it did not. She learned the difference between the hallway that spoke back and the stair that swallowed sound. When Gideon walked, she found his hand without asking him for it, and he let her have it. In town, the air was different, thinner, and more perfumed. The Santa Fe Club sat under fan palms that should not have been growing in this soil. White cuffs and bright ribbons and the buzz of people who talk more when they know they are being heard. Tess's dress was the blue one, and it had been pressed until the seams went quiet. Her shoes were mended to a degree that might hold. She squared her shoulders and walked in at Gideon's side. A woman with a lace collar glanced over Tess, took in hands that had done work, then looked past. Another woman raised a fan and smiled with her mouth, and not her eyes. A man's laugh caught on a word that did not make the trip between one class and another. Tess kept her jaw soft. Soft was a choice. Gideon felt the room look at him, and then at her, and then at him again. He had no patience for the game, and he played it anyway when it suited him. Today, it did not. At the long table, someone asked a question that was not a question about irrigation, and someone else turned the talk to crops and rainfall, as if to move the company to neutral ground. A place card marked Mr. Ward waited at the head. He did not take it. He pulled out the chair beside Tess and sat. He placed his cane against the table and did not angle it to catch. Conversation nearby slowed. One woman blinked twice quite fast and then lifted her glass. Tess Gideon said in a voice pitched for more than one person, "Tell Mrs. Kavanaugh about the cook's trick for beans when the wind turns south, the one with the handful of coffee grounds." Tess did not look at the woman who had not looked at her. She looked at Gideon. Then she spoke, and her words made a small bridge over the polished wood. Mrs. Kavanaugh leaned in without knowing she had moved. Fans stilled. Someone asked if the trick worked on venison as well. It did not. Tess explained why, like a teacher explaining the one thing a pupil might remember after all else has fled. They drove home as the sky went the color of long coals. Tess sat with her hands folded in her lap and her face turned just enough to watch the land slip by. Gideon kept his eyes on the road that was road only because Wheels had decided it would be. Wardhouse took them back with a shoulder of stone and a door that opened before they could raise a hand. The servants fell into the pattern that had started to feel like a pattern made for them and not for the furniture. That week, Gideon began appearing in the kitchen at hours when owners do not appear in kitchens. He stood out of the way and watched Tess weigh salt in her palm and taste with a spoon and then adjust. Her movements had learned this space quickly and had made of it something new while keeping what worked. The staff found their places around her. The house learned their names. At supper on a Thursday, he looked down the length of the dining table and then looked again. The chair to his right was not empty, nor the next, nor the one after that. The sound in the room had changed. It held forks and the soft scratch of Maya's pencil at the end of the meal when she bent over a napkin to fix the way she had drawn a hand earlier that day. Gideon took his place and then pushed his chair in closer than he was used to. The clock in the hall ticked steady and sounded like a thing agreeing with itself. Noah told a small story about the horse refusing to drink at the trough if the sun hit the water just right. Wren handed Gideon a slice of bread and butter without looking at him the way a child does when a person is moved from stranger to known. When he rose, he left the cane by the sideboard. The next afternoon a carriage arrived that looked expensive even to the untrained eye. It was glossy and bright and seemed to carry its own air inside it. Vivian Hale stepped down in a dress that would have troubled any seamstress worth her thread. Her gloved hand fluttered like a pale bird before it remembered that birds are never this practiced. "Gideon," she called, looking past the butler as if looking past men were a habit. She walked in with a smile that lived in the lower half of her face. Her eyes were busy elsewhere. "Vivian," Gideon said. He did not move to meet her and did not back away. His voice flattened the carpet between them. "I thought I would come and see this new arrangement for myself." She said the word arrangement doing work. Tess stepped from the hallway with a cloth in her hand. She had flour on one knuckle and did not hide it. Vivian's gaze paused for a heartbeat and then went on. "You must be Mrs. Ward," she said. "How lovely." The pause between words carried the meaning she did not speak. "Welcome," Tess said. She smiled in a way that admitted the visitor and refused to be measured by her. Vivian presented a small pie in a white box tied with ribbon. "Pecan," she said, "from Leon's." "Gideon, you always liked that place." "I like many things," he said. They sat in the parlor where the afternoon light gave the portrait on the wall a soft edge. Vivian's eyes flicked to it and away with a speed that wanted to be a kindness and was not. "You have rearranged," she said. "I have let some things be seen," Gideon said. Vivian admired the silver on the sideboard, as if the silver could return the favor. She tapped a finger against the lid of the sugar bowl and made a note with her fingernail. Ephraim stood near the doorway and could have been a piece of furniture if not for the pencil behind his ear that gave him away every time. They took tea. The cups were a matched set with a faint blue line, and Tess poured without spilling a drop. Vivian spoke of people in town who sent regards but had not sent them, and of cousins who may or may not have remembered names correctly. She laughed once and glanced at Gideon to see if he was keeping up. He was. When she rose, she put her hand on Tess's arm, in the way of people who mean to own a moment. "You must find it very new here," she said. "I find it full of work," Tess said. "Work can be a comfort," Vivian said. "It can be a life," Tess said. Vivian's smile brightened a fraction and then went cold again. "We will see you in town soon. People are curious." Gideon walked her to the door. He did not offer his arm. She stepped into the carriage with a turn of the ankle that had been practiced since she was a girl. The wheels found the road and made dust of it. She was gone, but not gone. Inside, Tess gathered the cups. The sugar bowl lid stood crooked. She set it right. Her hand hesitated and then moved on because there was always more to do next. Evening returned with a light that landed soft on faces and on bread. Gideon took his place and stayed at it. He watched as Wren leaned into Tess's side and as Maya set the first attempt at a portrait of Copper the dog in the empty space behind her plate. Copper's nose was too long by a finger's width. She would fix it later. After supper, Gideon walked the hall and ran his fingers along the chair backs in a way that looked like idleness and was not. He stopped in the pantry doorway. Jars lined the shelves. The chalk on the board listed flour and pepper and coffee. The sugar sat in a jar with a glass lid beside the silver bowl used for company. He touched the lid. It was cool and smooth. He put it back and stood in the doorway a moment longer than he needed. On the porch, the air had cooled. The wind came up out of the low country and carried a dry sound through the cottonwood leaves. The clocks inside called to one another down the hall. Noah's laugh reached him from the yard where he was showing Maya how to throw a rope at a post without hurting your wrist. Wren hummed a tuneless tune that still had a beginning, a middle, and an end. A pair of lamps burned low in the parlor. The portrait kept its place. The silver on the sideboard reflected only what was near. In the quiet of the kitchen, a small movement made the spoon in the sugar bowl ring once thin as a coin struck under a sleeve. The sound died at the same time as the last light on the far ridge. The house held its breath and then let it go. Founder's Day set bunting across Red Hollow like bright laundry. The brass band marched crooked and loud. Booths steamed with corn and sugar, the air full of grilled smoke and laughter that kept starting and stopping. Tess stood with the children near the square, while Gideon spoke with Sheriff Harlan Beck about a fence dispute at the north pasture. Wren held a paper pinwheel and made it turn by walking in small private circles. Vivian Hale appeared late, as if the day had been saving a place for her. She wore cream that would have made sense in a cooler season, and carried a white box with a blue ribbon tied too carefully to have been tied by anyone but a shop girl. She waved as if she had seen friends, though she had not stopped long enough to find any. "Peckin," she said to Gideon when she reached them. "From Leon's. I brought another for the house." Gideon nodded. His eyes flicked once to Tess and back. "Tea this afternoon," he said. "You can bring it up then." Vivian smiled and arranged her face around the word tea. It made her look younger for a blink, then older than she liked. By late day, the sky had flattened into heat. Ward House let in the brightness and tamed it to a decent hush. The parlor had been set without ceremony. Cups with the fine blue ring. The silver sugar bowl polished so well the room curled itself in its side. Tea steam carried verbena and lemon across the low table. The pecan pie sat on a plate with a nick at one edge that only Tess ever noticed. Ephraim hovered in a way that suggested he had other places to be and would rather be in none of them. He set a second spoon near the sugar, then turned it so the handle would not tangle with the tongs. Vivian leaned on the arm of a chair she did not intend to sit in. "I do love this room," she said. "It has learned how to keep a secret." "It has learned to be used," Tess said. She poured. The sound of tea leaving the pot was a sound a house could live by. Noah slid a book along the rug with the soft care of a boy who has begun to respect quiet. Maya staked a claim to the corner of the settee and sketched the way the light fell off the silver lid. Wren bounced from foot to foot and then settled when Gideon rested a palm on her shoulder. "Sugar," Vivian said lightly, as if she had thought of sweetness for the first time. She lifted the lid and praised the shine of the bowl in a voice made for admiration. Tess left for the pantry to fetch the lemon slices she had forgotten. The clink of glass on glass followed her small and neat. Vivian stood very straight. Her glove creaked once at a seam. In the doorway, Ephraim cleared his throat. It was not a warning. It was a sound like a man who remembers things. Vivian's hand moved with practiced economy. Something small slid into her palm from the depth of her bag. Her fingers tipped over one cup. A dusting. The powder lay on the surface in a crescent no wider than a thumbnail, then thinned, then sank. A pale rim collected where the porcelain met the liquid so faint you had to be looking for it. The spoon that sat beside the cup rang once when it touched the saucer. The sound was thin as a coin struck under a coat. Tess returned with a small plate and the tin fork that fit the nicked plate like a friend. She set lemon along the saucers and took her place at the end of the table. Gideon passed a cup to Vivian. He took his own, then reached for the one nearest Tess to slide it to her. The room breathed in and out. The dog in the yard barked once and went quiet. Wren rose and caught her toe on the edge of the rug. The fall was nothing at all, and still it made noise. She was up before the sound finished. Her knee was an angry pink. Tess put her cup down to reach her. The cup made a mark of heat on the table that would fade before dark. Gideon lifted the cup without looking at it, as a man who has lifted 1,000 cups does. He raised it toward his mouth. Lemon and verbena sweetened the steam. Under it, something else fingered the air, bitter, dry, a lick of metal. He stopped. The tea touched his lip, and no further. The taste sat there small and absolute, and brought the stable morning back without asking permission. He set the cup down with care. The tiny rim of pale at the edge of the tea showed itself in the light that found it. Vivian's face had the wrong stillness. It was stillness that comes when a body does not know which way to run. Gideon's voice when it arrived was low and even. "There is strychnine in this cup." Noah stood without meaning to. Maya put her pencil down without letting it roll. Wren sniffed and tried to swallow her sob because she was tired of being a child. Vivian laughed. The sound landed on the carpet and stayed there. "That is a very strange statement, Gideon." Ephraim took one step sideways and one forward until the door was nearer him than Vivian was. He did not reach inside his coat. He did not need to. Gideon picked up the spoon and drew it once through the tea. A film formed for the length of a heartbeat and then quivered and broke. He lifted the spoon to his nose and then set it down. He looked at Tess. He did not let his eyes show fear. Fear can move faster than a room. "Miss Hale," Gideon said, returning his gaze to the woman he had known since they were both shorter than any table in this house. "Open your bag." "How insulting," she said. "Open it," he said. There was nothing in the word but instruction. Vivian's hand moved to the clasp, then away, then back. She set the bag on the table and tipped it so that its small, loyal life spilled out. A silk handkerchief, a tin of pastilles, a little glass vial with a ground glass stopper white residue at the mouth that would not come clean with a thumb. Ephraim did not touch. He looked. "Sheriff," he said, already raising his voice to carry into the hall. "Have Harlan Beck up to the house. Now." Steps went out and down. A horse took to the yard with sudden knowledge of its own legs. Vivian's composure cracked and then came back like a poor plaster repair that pretends to be a wall. "You cannot possibly think I would harm anyone in this house," she said to Gideon. "You know me." "I do," he said. Tess had wrapped Wren's knee with her hand and a square of linen. She did not stand. She did not sit. She occupied the distance between the two and kept the child's breath even with her own. "Perhaps it fell," Vivian said, as if the word "fell" could be made to mean anything. "Perhaps your man dropped something in the kitchen. You do keep so many supplies for the fields." "You forget I know that smell," Gideon said. He picked up the offending cup and held it at a distance, not because it might leap, but because distance makes a thing easier to see. "I bought the tin myself. I told Owen where to put it. I told him to keep it away from the birds. It does not float into teacups." Vivian's hands found their own friction glove against glove. The sound was soft and raw at once. "This is beneath you," she said. Sheriff Beck had a way of arriving that made it seem he had been very close all along. He filled a doorway without needing to be tall. He looked at the room, then at the table. His hat came off with his hand and stayed there. "Mr. Ward," he said. Sheriff Gideon said. He inclined his head toward the table, toward the cup, toward the small vial that had lost its right to be small. "We have poison in tea and a guest who is pretending not to know how it got there." Harlan Beck did not touch anything either. He crouched to the level of the table and let his eyes get as near as they needed. He smelled and did not taste. He set the spoon back down, and the spoon made that same thin coin sound honest as a tell. "Miss Hale," he said, straightening, "I need you to come with me." Vivian's face tightened. Her gaze flicked to Gideon, then to Tess, then to the portrait on the wall, then back to the man who wore the law like a coat he had been born in. "Do you think anyone in this town will believe her over me?" she said, and now the care in her voice fell away. "She is a laundress. She is a wife by paper. I have known Gideon Ward longer than you have been upright." "You will stand up now," Harlan said. He did not raise his voice. "Ephraim, if you would help with the door." Vivian half rose, then threw her words like a lamp that was meant to break. "You wasted 18 years, and now you waste yourself. For this, for these, for a woman who will make you small. I thought you were a builder." Noah stepped forward and then back. He was learning. Maya's hand shook in a small circle over her paper, then steadied. Wren pressed her face into Tess's skirt. Tess stood still and let the child anchor her as much as she anchored the child. "Miss Hale," Harlan said. "Now." Vivian's mouth found a wry curve, then failed. She put out her hands as if offering them to a dance. Harlan set the cuffs, and the small sound they made when they closed was the only sound in the room. Ephraim moved so that the hallway had no angles that could be used as escape. The butler had his back to the stairs and held it with the dignity of a man who knows his job is to keep quiet and to keep. They took her out. The wheels scrabbled on the gravel before they remembered how to be wheels. Dust lifted once and then hung still. The parlor felt larger by the width of one person. Gideon turned to the children first. "You are safe," he said. He said it without promise, which is the only way to say such a thing so it might stick. He nodded to the maids. "Take them to their rooms. Read if you must. Sit with them." Noah did not want to go, which meant he should. He went. Maya took her paper and her pencil and folded both like a secret she did not want broken. Ren reached for Tess and did not let go until she could let go without fear of falling. The house settled. The clock in the hall found its beat and held it. The tea cooled and the skin formed and did not break. The lemon dried at the edges and went darker. Gideon lifted the blanket from the back of the settee and put it around Tess's shoulders. She had not sat. He guided her to a chair and she sat because the body eventually insists. Her hands were cold, which made no sense in this heat. He took one and warmed it between his two. The ring that had been new at the courthouse had begun to learn her finger. "I should have kept the door closed," she said. The sentence had no subject other than the one she could not name. "I should have kept company away from our table." "Nothing about this house is the same house it was," Gideon said. "Doors do not work the way they used to." She looked up. Her eyes were red at the rims and clear within. "You knew," she said. "The smell." "I knew," he said. The words cost less than he had expected. "I know because I put that poison in places where it belongs. Not here. Never here." She nodded and then shook her head, and then did not need to do either. Her breath found a new pace. The blanket shifted on her shoulders, and sane life eased back into the room. The portrait watched. The silver bowl sat as it had before, and as it would again. Between them, a man and a woman learned the measure of what had almost happened. Gideon spoke first because the words had formed in him with the pressure of a storm that refuses to break. "I have kept myself away from many things," he said. "I thought I had good reasons. Today I had a reason to be here. The thought of you harmed made my body remember it was a body." Tess closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, he was still there. "I came here because I needed to keep my children fed," she said. "I told myself that was the whole of it. It was easier to be small. It kept me from being afraid of becoming more." He did not kneel, and he did not stand above her. He chose the chair close enough that his knee nearly brushed her skirt. He set his cane out of reach without looking at it. His hands were empty. "I am a man with too many clocks," he said. "I have listened to them for years. Today all I heard was your name." Her mouth softened at the edges. "Say it," she said. "Tess," he said. She leaned forward. In the movement there was no performance. Her forehead came to rest against his cheek. His hand found the back of her head and stopped there. He did not move, as if afraid of ending it by trying to hold it closer. He kissed her. It was quiet and sure, a first step taken on solid ground. She answered. The room, which had held its breath for too long by any measure, let that breath go. They drew apart not far, and did not speak right away. Words sometimes do harm when they come too fast. The blanket slipped, and he fixed it, and in the fixing they both laughed, which was better medicine than anything in the cabinet behind the stairs. He looked toward the wall and the portrait, then back to her. "I will not rewrite what came before us," he said. "I cannot. I would not." "I do not need you to," she said. "I need you to stand where you are." "I can do that," he said. She put her hand on his. Her fingers were still cool, but they were her fingers. In the hall, the clock ticked steady. The house held to the beat it had finally learned. Outside, the cottonwood moved in a wind that was present and not hard. The tea on the table had gone cold and did not matter. The silver reflected a room where people sat close enough to be counted as one. The courthouse in Sage County smelled of ink and sunshine that had warmed the wood long before this morning. A fan turned slow above the clerk's desk and made a soft rhythm of its own. Tess stood with the children under a window where dust drew tiny lines through the light. Noah held his chin higher than the boy he had been, lower than the man he was learning to be. Maya's hands were clean for once and restless for something to hold. Ren pressed her palms to the glass and counted the wagons outside as if their number could steady her. The judge had a round face and careful eyes. He read the papers with a voice that carried without pushing. Gideon stood beside Tess and looked at each child as if the words were being written on their foreheads and not on paper. "Do you understand what this means?" the judge asked Noah. "Yes, sir," Noah said. He did not look away. "It means our name fits where we live." The judge smiled and blinked once. "That is well said." He turned to Maya. "Do you agree?" "I drew it," she said, showing him a quick sketch of a house with a name above the door. Her pencil had caught the angle of the porch roof exactly. The judge nodded and turned to Ren. "Are you ready to sign?" "My letters are small," she said, "but they count." "They do," he said. He held out the pen, and her hand made the shape it had practiced. The ink flashed wet, then set into the paper like the paper had been waiting for it. Gideon signed last. His name looked like the names of men who had signed other papers for other reasons. This one put weight in his chest and took weight from it at the same time. The judge tapped the stack to square it and handed over the certificates one by one. Wren stared at hers and then at Gideon. "Papa Ward," she said. The words arrived like something that had crossed a long road and then found home all at once. Outside, the heat met them and spread itself on their shoulders. The cottonwood let go of a single leaf, and it spun through air bright enough to make eyes water. The town watched and kept its distance, then watched again. The family stepped into the day, and the day gave way for them. Time took to the house without asking. Spring soaked into the earth. Summer hardened the ground and made a skin over puddles that boys could break with heels. Autumn burned low on the ridge like coals that do not want to die. On a morning that smelled of cut hay, Noah came back from Mesa Academy with boots scuffed and a book that did not fit into his pocket. He strode to the stable and put his hand on the horse's neck, the way Gideon had taught him from the shoulder up. He talked to Owen Pike about feed and sore hooves and things that men talk about when they remember to listen first. When he walked with Gideon to the pasture fence, their shadows fell side by side, one long and one not quite so long. Maya's room in the north gallery learned the color of paint. Her fingers made smudges on the edge of her apron, and her hair carried a streak of blue she had forgotten. Gideon had a frame made for the portrait of Copper that had begun as a mistake of a nose too long and had become a dog you could hear breathe if you stood quiet. She hung it beside the portrait of the woman in blue. The two pictures did not argue. They filled the room with different kinds of looking. Wren ran with Copper across the yard, and the dog turned himself in a tight circle when she laughed. She learned the names of the roses and learned that some would prick you even if you meant no harm. She gathered eggs warm from the nest and set them in the bowl like treasures one by one, speaking a thank you the hens did not need to hear in order to be thanked. Tess taught letters to the children of men who worked the yard and the fields. She laid chalk on the slate in the old tack room where the smell of leather and soap still lived in the walls. The sound of small voices saying words together turned the place into something nobody had ordered and everybody needed. At the back of the room, Gideon stood sometimes with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders loosened in a way only the unpracticed eye would miss. Evenings stretched themselves across the table. The chairs that had once waited like soldiers stood now as if they had learned to bend. Gideon took his place and did not sit at the head because the head was wherever Tess set the bread. The hall clock ticked sure of itself, and the kitchen kept a hum that had more to do with people than with fire. One late afternoon, the light on the porch turned honey-colored and stuck to the posts. Tess settled into the swing beneath the cottonwood. Her dress pulled smooth over a curve that had not been there in the spring. Gideon stepped out and found her hand without looking, and then did look because this was not a thing to be touched without being seen. He laid his palm on her belly. The movement under his hand was not strong yet, but it was particular. It announced itself without force. He felt his face go soft and did not pull it back into discipline. He was learning that some things do not require control in order to be done well. "Have you thought of a name?" Tess said. The question had been walking with them for days and had finally taken a chair. "I have," he said. "If you will have it. Caleb Gideon Ward." Her eyes filled without making a show. He would have liked that, she said. "I would like him to stay present in a way that does not ask you to choose," Gideon said. "I am not choosing," she said. "I am adding." A breeze moved through the leaves, and the swing rocked once or twice without help. The air held heat and a promise of rain that would not come for hours. When the time came, it came at the edge of night, where the world feels unsure of which way to turn. Tess woke with a breath held too long and let it go. Gideon woke with her alert as if pulled from water. He sent for the midwife and for the woman from the next ranch who had hands that had helped bring 5 babies into light. The house stirred and settled, and the children were gathered by the maid with the stray curl at the nape who knew how to play cards and keep count without thinking. Gideon walked the length of the hallway until he knew every board that complained and every gap that let cool air sneak through. He stepped into the study once and stood with his hand on the frame of the portrait. He did not look away and did not look too long. He went back to the door where life was working out its own long problem. Through the long hours, the house kept him company. The clocks ticked in concert. The stove breathed. Men at the stable talked low to keep the animals from catching a nervousness that was not theirs to carry. In the yard, the cottonwood stood like a patient witness. The cry came near dawn. It cut the last of the darkness open and let morning pour in. Gideon nearly sat down on the floor where he stood. He did not. He went into the room when he was told to come and found Tess pale and fierce and a live hair damp at the edge eyes clear. The midwife lifted a bundle into his arms, and the world shrank to the span of cloth and the warm weight against his chest. The boy's face was new and familiar both, a nose that had not decided itself, a mouth working at nothing and at everything. When the eyes opened a crack, they were a gray that might turn any number of directions someday. Gideon did not plan for that day. He watched the breath move the small ribs and felt his own breath change to match it. Caleb Tess said, "Meet your father." Gideon felt the name land and sink deep where his ribs met. He kissed the top of the small head and gave the baby back to Tess, and then rested his forehead on hers for one long, uninterrupted moment. Words wanted to come. He let them wait their turn. The children came in one at a time as if the room had to agree to each new person and did. Noah stood tall and suddenly unsure of where to put his hands. "You will not break him," Gideon said, and the boy laughed once quiet. Maya looked and then looked again so that she would not have to redraw later. Ren slid a finger along the baby's hand and the hand closed around it like a secret. "He smells like bread," Ren said, "but softer." They returned to the house that was a house in a way it had not been. The portrait kept watch. The room filled itself with the small sounds of a new life that would join the larger sounds when it was ready. Days fell into pattern. Night wore new shapes. Gideon rose when the child cried and learned that the floor in the West Wing had one place that would wake anyone if stepped on. He avoided it without thinking. He changed the sawdust in the cradle and discovered that his hands could do more than numbers and reins. He held the boy against his chest and walked the hall until the lamp oil threw a steady flame and the breath in his arms did the same. At supper 1 week later, every chair was filled. The head was wherever Tess set the bread, and the broth and the pears she had stewed slow. Noah told a story about a colt finding its legs in a ridiculous way that only a colt can manage. Maya passed around a drawing of the baby's hand that she had sketched while he slept. Ren announced that Copper had learned to touch a paw to her shoe when he wanted out, and that this meant he was educated. Gideon poured water. He reached for the salt and then did not shake too much. He looked along the table and then at the far wall and then back to Tess. The clock in the hall spoke exactly as it should. The cane rested against the sideboard. The sugar bowl lid sat straight. He reached for Tess's hand under the table and found it. She squeezed his fingers just once in answer, more than in need. Later that night, they sat on the porch under a sky slick with stars. The air had cooled and learned to taste like water. The cottonwood, hour by hour, let go of nothing and everything. The baby slept in the cradle by the open door, breath small and strong. The house behind them kept its quiet promises. Tess leaned into Gideon. He felt the weight and knew it was not a burden. He watched the darkness between leaves and the way the world made room around them without having to be asked. He listened to the clocks. He listened to the breathing in the next room. He listened to the wind that had once pushed dust through cracks and now moved the curtain in a way that courted sleep. Inside, one clock missed a beat and then found it without fuss. The hands kept moving. The night held. The house at last knew the sound of itself. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.